Have you ever met a woman who didn't try to impress you, didn't try to be liked, didn't try to be chosen, and yet somehow her presence alone made you feel exposed, unsettled, almost as if something inside you was being quietly observed and understood without a single word being spoken? It's not intimidation in the usual sense. It's not arrogance, and it's definitely not coldness. It is something far more difficult to explain and far more confronting to experience. It feels as though she is seeing through the surface, through the performance, through the carefully constructed identity you show the world, and looking directly at the parts of you that you have spent years trying to hide. Your mind searches for an explanation. Your ego tries to regain control, but something deeper in you recognizes that this encounter is not random. Most people, in a world that prioritizes logic and dismisses anything that cannot be measured, will reduce this experience to personality differences or simple attraction dynamics. They will say, she is just confident, maybe a little distant, maybe emotionally unavailable. But this interpretation barely scratches the surface of what is actually happening. From a Jungian perspective, what you are encountering is not just a personality type. You are encountering a stage of psychological evolution, a stage where the feminine psyche has moved beyond validation, beyond unconscious attachment, beyond the need to be defined by relationships. This stage is often referred to as Sophia, the embodiment of wisdom, not as an idea, but as a lived, integrated reality. And this is where things begin to shift in a way that most people are not prepared for. Because when the divine feminine reaches the Sophia stage, she does not become more accommodating, more agreeable, or more easily understood. She becomes precise. She becomes discerning. She becomes anchored in a level of inner clarity that makes unconscious dynamics immediately visible. And in a world where most relationships are built on subtle forms of unconscious exchange, this kind of clarity does not feel comforting. It feels disruptive. To understand why, you have to look at how most people relate to each other beneath the surface. Relationships are rarely as conscious as we believe them to be. They are often built on invisible agreements, quiet negotiations between unmet needs, unhealed wounds, and deeply rooted fears. One person seeks validation, the other seeks control. One fears abandonment, the other fears engulfment. And without realizing it, both people participate in a dynamic that allows them to avoid confronting their own inner contradictions. But a woman in the Sophia stage no longer participates in this system. It is not that she refuses consciously or tries to rebel against it. It is that she simply no longer operates from that level of need. She has already done the difficult, uncomfortable work of turning inward. She has confronted her own shadow, the parts of herself that are insecure, reactive, afraid, or dependent. She has sat with those parts long enough to understand them, to integrate them, and ultimately to stop projecting them onto others. And because of this, something subtle but powerful happens in her interactions. She stops reacting in predictable ways. She does not chase validation, so she cannot be easily manipulated through approval or withdrawal. She does not fear abandonment in the same unconscious way, so she does not cling or overextend herself to maintain connection. She does not ignore red flags because she is no longer trying to preserve an illusion. This creates a kind of psychological friction for the people around her. Because when someone cannot engage with you on an unconscious level, you are left with only two options. You either rise into awareness yourself, or you experience discomfort. This is why the divine feminine in the Sophia stage is often described as dangerous, even if no one uses that exact word. She is dangerous to illusions. She is dangerous to denial. She is dangerous to the fragile identities people construct to avoid facing their own inner world. And perhaps most importantly, she is dangerous to any relationship dynamic that depends on unconscious patterns to survive. When someone stands in front of her, they are not just interacting with her personality, they are encountering a mirror. not a flattering mirror that reflects only what they want to see, but a clear, undistorted reflection of what is actually there. Their insecurities, their contradictions, their emotional habits, their avoidance patterns. All of it becomes more visible in her presence, not because she is exposing them intentionally, but because she is no longer participating in the mutual illusion that keeps those things hidden. For some people, this is deeply attractive. There is a certain kind of individual who feels an immediate sense of calm around her. Not excitement in the chaotic, addictive sense, but a grounded, steady feeling that is almost unfamiliar. They do not feel the need to impress her, because they sense that performance will not work. They do not feel the urge to manipulate the situation, because there is nothing to manipulate, and instead of resisting this, they lean into it. They become more honest, more present, more willing to engage with themselves. But for others, the reaction is very different. They feel exposed, not physically, but psychologically. It is as if something in them is being quietly revealed, and they are not ready to see it. This can trigger defensiveness, control, even subtle forms of hostility. They may try to challenge her, test her boundaries, pull her into emotional games, or label her in ways that make her easier to understand and therefore easier to dismiss. They might call her cold, difficult, intimidating, or emotionally unavailable. But what they are actually reacting to is the absence of illusion. And this is where the deeper layer of danger emerges, because the Sophia stage feminine does not just expose others. She also refuses to abandon herself. In earlier stages of development, there is often a willingness to tolerate misalignment in order to maintain connection, to overlook inconsistencies, to rationalize behavior, to stay in situations that do not fully align with one's truth. But at this level, that becomes almost impossible. She sees too clearly, she feels too accurately, and because of that, she cannot participate in relationships that require her to disconnect from her own inner knowing. This is why her standards are often misunderstood. It is not that she expects perfection. It is that she no longer negotiates with what she knows to be true. And while this creates a higher quality of connection, it also creates a kind of isolation that few people talk about. Because when you can no longer pretend, your world becomes quieter. The number of people you can genuinely connect with decreases, not because you are superior, but because you are no longer operating on the same unconscious frequency. The conversations change, the dynamics change, the attraction patterns change, and this can feel both empowering and deeply lonely at the same time. But there is another layer to this that is often overlooked. The danger of the Sophia stage is not only how others experience her, it is also how she manages her own power. Because when you see clearly, when you understand patterns, when you can read emotional dynamics with precision, there is a temptation to withdraw completely, to disengage from anything that feels complicated or imperfect, to remain in a space of control where nothing can disrupt your inner balance. But this is where wisdom can quietly turn into distance. Because true integration is not about avoiding complexity. It is about engaging with it consciously. The Sophia stage feminine must make a choice. She can use her awareness to protect herself from everything, to remain untouched, unaffected, and ultimately disconnected. Or she can use that same awareness to create something deeper, something more intentional, something that allows for both truth and vulnerability to exist at the same time. And this is what separates wisdom from isolation. Because despite everything she sees, despite everything she understands, she still chooses to remain open, not blindly, not naively, but consciously. She allows connection, but not at the cost of self-abandonment. She allows vulnerability, but not at the expense of truth. And when she reaches this balance, her presence changes again. It is no longer just revealing, it becomes transformative. People do not just feel exposed in her presence. They feel invited to be real, to drop the performance, to step out of unconscious patterns and into something more honest. And for those who are ready, this is not threatening. It is liberating. But even then, the perception remains. She is still seen as dangerous. Because she cannot be controlled, she cannot be reduced to a role, she cannot be manipulated through fear, approval, or emotional inconsistency. And in a world where many relationships still rely on those mechanisms, that kind of independence is unsettling. So when we say that the divine feminine becomes dangerous in the Sophia stage, what we are really saying is something much simpler but far more profound. She becomes free. Free from the need to be chosen, free from the fear of being alone, free from the unconscious patterns that keep people locked in cycles of attachment, validation, and emotional survival. And freedom, when it is embodied at that level, does not just change the individual. It changes every interaction, every relationship, every dynamic she enters. The question is not whether she is dangerous. The question is whether the people who encounter her are ready to let go of who they think they are and face who they actually are. Because in her presence, that is no longer optional.